I think it's something which, one of my managers had told me, and it really stuck with me all my life. It's on your hardest day, in your most difficult phase, how did the organization and your leader and your manager and your organization and your team make you feel, right? So it is not easy to experience that consistently every day, but that's how culture is built, right?
Welcome to Parenting at Work, the podcast exploring the real-world intersection of family life and the workplace. I'm your host, Lindsey Topping-Schuetz. We're here to dive into real, honest conversations with leaders and innovators who are redefining what it means to support families in the workplace. My hope is that these conversations leave you feeling inspired and equipped to build a more compassionate world at work. Because work and family aren't two separate lives. They're one integrated reality. Parenting at Work is brought to you by Juno, the modern financial safety net for working families.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Parenting at Work. I am very excited to introduce you all today to Amrita Bhaumik. She spent more than 2 decades leading HR across global organizations, including serving as Chief Human Resources Officer at Valvoline Global Operations, where she was responsible for over 3,000 employees across nearly 30 countries. Today, she's the Vice President of Human Resources at Team Car Care, one of the largest franchises of Jiffy Lube. Amrita operates at the highest level of HR, working closely with executive teams and boards, shaping talent strategy, total rewards, and culture across complex global businesses. And at the same time, she is also a parent navigating the same tension so many people feel, trying to show up fully at work and at home. So today we are going to talk about what that really looks like, how she thinks about supporting employees through those moments, and where she believes the system still falls short. Amrita, welcome to Parenting at Work.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I am thrilled to be speaking with you today. I want to jump right in. I think, as the podcast indicates, Parenting at Work, we are all wearing multiple hats. And I would like to start today with the professional cap, the professional hat. Please tell me, what is your philosophy and approach to being a people leader?
That's a great question. And, after, as you, very kindly introduced me with more than 2 decades of HR experience, I would think the way I would define my people leader is from a professional perspective is how do I enable a business or, enable a business growth and results through human capital. So I simply think about it like that, that's the most, critical role as people leaders, that what kind of an enabling environment or processes and a culture that we create, which promotes people to give their best. They come into work every day thinking that this is an environment which will nurture my growth. And I go back feeling, feel that the organization is taking care of me, and provided me a safe and nurturing environment. So that's how at least I look at myself as a people leader and the leaders that I work with.
Yeah, that is wonderful. And you mentioned, 20 years of working with Valvoline before transitioning to your current role at Jiffy Lube. Working with a new company, does it feel a bit like you get to rewrite the playbook? And do you get to reestablish your existing best practices? Tell me a bit about that.
I think it's been interesting because, although I kind of, it's been about 7, 8 months in this new role, it's a similar industry. And, I'd like to kind of specifically call that out a little bit to say that all my life, I've actually worked in very intensive operational environments. So it's been working with teammates who necessarily don't have, I would say, the privilege of flexibility because they are all operational roles. You're a store employee or you're working in the manufacturing environment. You need to turn up every day. There are fixed schedules, etc. So I think it's given me a completely different perspective. And also, Valvoline gave me the opportunity to work in a global role. So I kind of saw, I feel like I witnessed and experienced that difference and a lot of similarities in all of the countries and, cultures, etc. that I supported. So it was probably to go back to your question, definitely a start, but I didn't necessarily, I think, have to rewrite the playbook quite as much. It just seemed like in a different environment with similar challenges.
Yeah, you have your toolkit that you have developed, I'm sure, over the years, and it's just a matter of how to plug those all into the right people, right place, right time. What is your biggest priority right now as someone who's closing in on your first year at Jiffy Lube?
Yeah, the biggest priority for myself and the business is really kind of enabling our culture to to make sure that we have an environment where our leaders are very strong. And when I talk about leaders, I'm actually talking about the store general managers, people at our 450 stores who are running their operations, and they're almost like player coaches where they're running the show, they're leading teams, and at the same time also getting under the hood. So how do we build strong leaders? How do they build a strong talent pipeline as well to keep their stores staffed, running safely, as well as with the highest level of focus on operations, and most importantly, focus on guests and our customers. So I think that's always been a challenge for the business. It's even more now. And it's an interesting environment, and I cannot help but talk about AI and the influence on at least most of our businesses and HR. But I think this is one industry which almost seems like AI proof, because you will need to drive in, get your vehicle serviced, and drive out. But at the same time, we're realizing that there is so much of a need for good talent, to come out of universities, come out of schools and colleges to want to do this job. And how do we create strong employment value proposition to attract that talent? So yeah, I mean, I think these are some of the critical challenges as I complete a year into this business.
So, this question sort of plays into what you said there at the end. You're making big decisions to support your employees and their families. What do you see as the biggest trade offs that make it hard to support families the way that you would want to? You mentioned some of the folks are frontline leaders and their employees that don't have the same privileges as somebody in the office would. So, tell me more about that.
I think the first thing comes from awareness. It's interesting that there is a lot of opportunity for creating more awareness on how a frontline employee can make their lives better. And there are resources that myself and I, when I talk to my peers and colleagues as well, that we are willing to invest, or the organization's investing, but they're not necessarily uh, meeting the mark, in the sense it's not making the impact that it should. That in terms of adoption rates, or in terms of understanding that, yeah, this is really good for me if I invest in this financial tool, or I invest in insurance for my family and things like that. So it's a lot more, I tend to see the workforce as being far more reactive, and kind of we'll just tackle it when the issue comes. So I think it starts with building that awareness, and also building a bit of flexibility in terms of what we are offering, because I think organizations also tend to, for various reasons, budgets and consistency and other reasons, want to keep a very one size fits all approach. But I'm a big believer that that's not going to work. You need to meet people where they are, right? So and we have a lot of tools and resources today, and support from a lot of people in this field, who are making us think a bit differently. So I like to explore that a bit more, to make sure that we are a bit more flexible, in terms of our offerings. These are the couple of things that I'm at least observing.
So, how have you noticed any differences with how the two brands treat benefits and caregiving specifically? What stands out to you?
I think it's well, I would say that there's been an evolution. I mean, because I spent such a lot of time in the auto industry, and again, as I said, it's a bit different in different countries. It was not necessary. It was almost like, as I said, a one size fits all, and and in many countries, it's almost like a compliance uh, check in the box, right? Versus really meeting people where they need, where they are, and trying to be more flexible and cognizant of what stage of life they are at, what are the different needs that they might be having. So that's the huge change that I see. And I see that now in Team Car Care, now as we are talking to more partners and, providers, etc. That I think that there is certainly more data, there's more data analysis, and there is more solutions which are catered to those differences. So that, I think, is an exciting place to be at for the industry, and it is certainly going to, at the end of the day, be fair and flexible for our working population. And then again, as I said, the difference in caregiving is really firstly acknowledging that, as I said, policies, etc., are in place, but we definitely need to build in flexibility and empathy. So that's I think I see a big change. Yep.
I'm glad to hear that. I know in my family specifically, Our child has a pretty significant disability. So I actually had to step out of the workforce for almost 7 years. And I think that there were many things along that path that I learned not just about myself, but about the workforce and what I would be looking for in a company so that I could come back to work, but also how could I be successful and really be able to be present. And as I have an opportunity to speak with people like yourself, it is really a positive, reaffirming thing to continue to hear. Companies say they want to be meeting people where they are at, having that flexibility, because I do think that there are a number of people out there that are talented and have so much to give professionally. And it really takes that creative thinking and how to partner these two worlds. So that kind of leads us to putting on our other cap, that of parents, not just professionals. You told me that you have one human child who is not a child anymore and one fur baby at home. I would love if you would be open to sharing with us the most challenging or interesting time period for you balancing work and home life.
Oh yeah, and firstly, Lindsay, thank you so much for sharing your personal story. I wish you all the best. And it is, yeah, I can quite imagine what you described in terms of, the hard decisions as parents that we are taking, or constantly, trying to weigh one decision against the other, which of course gets amplified when, you are caring for your child. So I think it's pretty much, while years back, as I said, I'm probably dating myself with my how far back I go back in my career. But I think it was a lot of I just keep saying that it's more than a balance. It's a choice that you make at different points of your life, right? So I had a very fantastic supportive partner and family, of course, through this entire journey. And that's exactly how it kind of worked out in terms of the entire caregiving process. It certainly was not easy. Now when she's almost 21, and I kind of go back and we laugh about a few things, but and I realized that, oh my God, I made such huge mistakes. Or sometimes I did prioritize. We all have done that, right? There's a school event or a sick child, or there's something which requires attention, but you made a choice that perhaps to take a trip, work trip, or attend that important meeting, and then you've been racked with mom guilt. But I feel like there's been a lot of, I guess, clarity, and we've been always very open, both my husband and I, with our child, to say that here's why we are doing what we are doing. And there are and that open communication, and we used to always tell her that particular dates, and we used to have rules like, okay, we'll never miss her birthday. So even that rule went out of the window after a few years, where one of us would be probably traveling on a birthday, and we used to keep saying that it's not the date, it's the celebration. So things like that. And I used to always use the term co-opting with her to say that, here's, I've got this very important meeting today, you know what I'm doing. And so when I would come back from work, she would ask me, so what did you do, mom? What was the outcome and stuff like that, and so it's, I think, a lot of that, and definitely not hesitating to ask for a lot of support, and a fantastic work environment where my managers were always very, very supportive. Not necessarily that they were all parents themselves, but they at least had that empathy and understanding to say, yes, there are situations which require flexibility. So I would think, yeah, those are the 3-4 sort of strategies or tactics which at least work for me professionally.
And I can appreciate that it may not always be one exact moment that defines the challenge. It can be lots of little moments. And I think all of us have that parent guilt. And I love what you said about, I might miss the birthday.
Yeah.
But we're going to have a celebration.
Yes.
Huge. And that is something that feels so much more manageable as a parent to hear and think, okay, we just got to do the celebration.
Yeah.
Let go of the date. Let go of that pressure. I think that that's really important. You mentioned that you had managers that maybe weren't parents themselves, but they had empathy. Did you feel comfortable during this journey when you had these moments come up where you felt like you could share what was going on with your manager, with your HR professional? Did you feel like you could, share that it was challenging, or did you feel like you had to keep it locked up? And, how, if you don't mind answering that piece, but I also want to be thinking about your work is international. So how does that show up differently, maybe in different places and spaces that you have worked?
Yeah, I would candidly say that it was I would say it was a journey because again, if you've seen my career trajectory, I've been in an automotive industry, which was traditionally a very male dominated industry. There was no way, I mean, there's no other way of describing it because it used to be where, I would be perhaps the only female leader in a room of 300 men, right? So it took a while to create that space because it's only when, and I got pregnant when I started my job with Valvoline and I had her while I was still working, took a maternity break, came back and went through the journey. So it really required me to create that space to say, hey, yeah, I'm a mom and there are things which I will have to prioritize first when she's younger, and when she's older and in a position to kind of manage or I have a lot of help, I'm fully dedicated to the career and the work and the intense amount of travel that I had to kind of undertake. So I was fortunate that I was able to create that understanding and that safe space to talk to my managers about it. And I oftentimes feel that it also helped so many other women who came after me, right? Because people not only just in my team, but around, because just to say that, yes, it's almost, and, it's not just to say that I'm a role model, but to say that I could model it and, I was fortunate and I could talk about some ways in which it worked for me. So it becomes more believable for somebody else wanting to do it. Because I think that's the only way. You just have to be an ally or you have to model the behavior yourself and create that environment. There's is the only way. And there needs to be there was a lot of, back in India, of course, when I started, return to work sort of, where you took a break to be a mom or a parent and then came back, was always, the re-entry was always very hard. So I kind of worked at that point of time with certain organizations were really kind of working with women wanting to come back and give them sort of an opportunity to make sure that they had, a platform to come back in, right? So things like that, it's been a mix of intentional efforts from my end, a very supportive environment, and policies and compliances also, interestingly, because a lot of ways I saw it during my career that how the laws itself have become more supportive to enable parents to take time off and then come back. So yeah, I would think combination of three.
So you are being very humble in saying that you have shown the way a bit, but maybe not a role model. I would say you are definitely a role model and you are setting a path so that other men see how this can be different, but absolutely laying a foundation for so many women, as you mentioned, in an industry that was so heavily male dominated for so many years, which is incredible. Thank you for being who you are and showing up in that way for so many parents. And again, I think we sometimes miss the messaging when we talk about this topic. It is not just about the parents, even the colleagues we have that choose not to, or for whatever reason, don't have a family. We
Yeah,
all need to be stronger for each other to be
exactly.
successful in the workplace. And I think that it sounds like you've really done a beautiful job of kind of marrying these two worlds for others.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've made humongous mistakes on the way as well. But in hindsight, I know that, yeah, it's just that because I think I've been fortunate to see several role models or women in the workplace who've done that. And it's such a powerful, message.
When I think about the journey that people go on throughout their parenting experience, starting kind of having this before and after, whether that be before they had children and then they become a working parent, or the before and after where maybe they did have one of these moments that we described that, there's many little ones, but sometimes there's a very clearly defined moment where we have this realization where we change kind of what we expect for ourselves, for our family, and also out of the place that we work. I would love to hear from you. Are there examples of tangible change that you have implemented as a direct result of your experience?
Yes, and I would think, I mean, if it's all right, I'll probably refer to a couple of examples which were in my former sort of role as a, global HR leader, because I think one of the things, as I was briefly mentioning earlier, the compliances or the laws around childcare or taking time off for childbirth varies incredibly across countries. And it's pretty interesting to see that as the societies, I think, or the working sort of societies are evolving, it certain countries make it easier for women to come back and very much encouraging, and some extremely, I think, constrictive and discouraging. So you have so many women kind of dropping off for the moment they decide, and becomes an either or decision, right? So one of the things I would say that I kind of pushed through and worked with my corporate office here also at that time was to have more of a consistency in our policies, irrespective of what the local law wanted or had. So, which really helped set apart the organization as a company which was forward thinking and truly believed in an equal opportunity employer, right? I think that was one of the things we were able to implement, that irrespective of whether you're in Europe, you're in Asia, or you're in North America, this was the parental leave policy, and it was going to be uniformly implemented across the business. So we did do that, and certain other things related to childcare on site, and provision of those. Again, very different laws in different countries and requirements, but I would say that that was one. It was not just me, but it was with the support from a lot of our leadership, a lot of women in very very high leadership positions across the company who supported it. And so we were able to implement. And I think that kind of is something I feel very proud of, that it really did set us apart as an employer of choice. And, really, once you make those changes and those policies, it really has people believing that, yes, it's not just lip service. You truly believe that you want to create that level playing field.
How do you take the idea, like the one you just described to us, that you want to change that experience for women coming back into the workforce? How do you work with leadership to explain, or I don't want to say convince, but that's the word that keeps popping up into my mind. There's so many conflicting challenges and needs and demands on executives, on leadership of these companies. How did you get them to see your vision?
I always approach it with, one is data. I'm pretty big on data. So I make sure that if I'm talking to my leadership, or I, want to bring forward a perspective, it is backed up well with data. So I think, and data is internal to our business. So, to really, showcase that, yes, if this is what we are aiming to be as an employer, that this is what, let's say, the percentage of how our gender diversity is going to be across the business. And this is some of the data in terms of where we are, where we want to be, and how particularly, how are people performing, the performance data, how their leaders are kind of, rating them, and talking about them when they're not in the room, and what is the kind of high potential leaders, etc., that we have. So it's a lot of talking about the data, and then coming there and, coming to the room armed with that, and giving a lot of examples. And oftentimes it's somebody will not just come out and openly say it, especially in a meeting with a lot of people, but there will be some misgivings. So working on those, trying to influence on almost meeting before the meeting, to make sure that they are, they feel comfortable and aligned when we are bringing these concepts in. And at the same time, also making sure that, it's not just, as I keep saying, that it's not just HR said it or it's a diktat. You really need to leave that room owning that decision. And some leaders are in a position to do it, some may not. So we work through all of those different situations. So I would think that it's like, yeah, it's a combination of all of those.
There are so many things that our listeners can learn from you. If you had to give one piece of advice for other HR leaders, again, who may be listening to us today, please share with them any tips or thoughts you have to help them become more empathetic managers.
Yeah, I think it's something which, one of my managers had told me, and it really stuck with me all my life. It's on your hardest day, in your most difficult phase, how did the organization and your leader and your manager and your organization and your team make you feel, right? So it is not easy to experience that consistently every day, but that's how culture is built, right? It is built with that understanding that, you are indeed wanting to create an environment where somebody comes in and they want to do their best at work, but at the same time, they're as we used to keep saying, right? And keep saying that you bring your whole self to the work. So the whole self is a combination of a lot of things. It's your personal life, it's you as a parent, it's the role you play as a caregiver to perhaps elderly parents or family members, etc. So you're bringing all of that in. So create an environment which helps nurture that, and be very clear about expectations, and communicate what in terms of performance and growth, what are the expectations, what are outcomes, deliverables, goals, etc. And then you have employees who feel empowered to to really come into work and do their best and focus on their own careers and development, but at the same time balance their personal lives as well. So that's the advice I would kind of give team members and HR leaders, that keep that eye and ear out, and and work with your leaders. Your leaders are really the front line. They are the ones who are facing teams and working with their teams every day. So help them, coach them to build that sense.
I love what you're sharing with us. I think that one of the things I'm hearing from you is that we are all just doing the best we can, and we are going to hear from one another. And I think that most people don't expect perfection. I think they want to be heard and feel like they matter. That whole person counts and is acknowledged. And it sounds like you have a really wonderful balance that you have struck in doing this work. You also talked a lot about, and again, you kind of downplayed it a little bit, but just the bringing a healthy, balanced workplace in industries that didn't have that just naturally built into them. And I think that that's really important work. It's powerful. I hope that the people listening today are not just inspired by that, but also see it as an opportunity to look at their own workspaces and decide where are those other gaps and how they can maybe use their voice to help bring a better resolution to the people that they are leading and connecting to. If people want to learn more from you or connect with you, what is the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
Of course, that'll be lovely. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so I think definitely they should hit me up on LinkedIn. There are not too many people with my name and who look like me, so I think they should find me very easily. And I think my last name dot first name at gmail.com is my email ID. So I love connecting and talking to people, or if they send me an email, I'll be sure to get back. And as I said, I've been incredibly lucky with a lot of opportunities and a lot of spaces to do what I've done, and have got a lot of support as well. So I'd really like to give it back, or rather pay it forward. So happy to be available as a resource to whom may need it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us today. Thank you for your time. Thank you to everyone for listening. Now let's get back to work.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lindsey.
Thanks for joining us at Parenting at Work. If you liked this conversation, make sure to subscribe to Parenting at Work where you get your podcasts. And if this story resonated with you, the single most impactful thing you can do is share it with one other person, a fellow HR leader, a manager, or anyone who believes in building workplaces that care. Parenting at Work is brought to you by Juno, the modern financial safety net for working families. Juno helps employers offer affordable long-term coverage for children who develop new severe illnesses or disabilities, giving parents peace of mind and flexibility when it matters most. You can learn more about how Juno is helping companies build family-first benefits at junokids.com. I'm Lindsey. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to work.